Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Stefan, and today we're going to talk about how earthing can dramatically help with chronic fatigue syndrome by optimizing the functioning of your hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal HPA axis. Now earthing, that is connecting your bioelectric electromagnetic potential with that of the earth, also improves your autonomic nervous system rhythms. So this means your brain waves, your heart rhythms, and therefore this improves your balance between sympathetic nervous system activity, this is your fight or flight response, and your parasympathetic rest and digest response. So if you're chronically tired, always fatigued, or are running out of energy before you would like to, then I suggest you watch this video all the way to the end, because we're going to talk about how you can achieve that deep rest that's eluding you, fall asleep easier, have that deep sleep, and overall rejuvenate your body and get rid of this chronic fatigue syndrome by earthing, and also with a few bonus things down here. So with that, let's jump right in. Before we get into what the HPA axis governs and the functioning of the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the adrenal glands, and before we talk about earthing and tellurics and Schumann resonances and space weather in depth, among other things on here like the sleep cycle, let's first talk about what some chronic symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome are and some common causes of chronic fatigue syndrome. Because you may or may not have it, you may even be unaware that you have some degree of chronic fatigue syndrome, because this is not a 0 or a 1, this is kind of like a sliding scale of dysfunction. So the first and most obvious symptom of chronic fatigue syndrome is that you're fatigued, and that you're fatigued chronically. You're always tired. You can't find energy to do what you want to do throughout the day. This can also be volatile energy throughout the day. This is often related to blood sugar, as we'll talk about later. But one of the hallmarks of this tiredness and this fatigue is that it's not necessarily easy for you to then fall asleep or rest and rejuvenate. Typically after like a hard day's work, let's say at the gym or manual labor, or just you've been busy, it's easy to fall asleep. But with chronic fatigue syndrome, the dysfunction of that means that you actually have a difficult time entering into that parasympathetic state of rest and digest, feed and breed. So this can also be connected to libido issues, fertility problems. Those are other symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome. Weight gain, metabolic problems, because it's related to your gut and also your insulin secretion, your blood sugar, your pancreas. And then there's also problems like brain fog, and you have mental health issues potentially. This could be depression, anxiety. At the very far end of the spectrum, things like schizophrenia and psychosis. And you have also a very low stress tolerance. One of the ways that chronic fatigue syndrome builds up is that you're chronically stressing yourself all the time. Whether this is hard physical stress, this could be emotional stress, mental stress, or a combination of all of those. So if you have a low stress tolerance, then that's a sign that you have a bit of a dysfunction with your hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal axis, because that's the job of that HPA axis, is to respond to stress to maintain homeostasis within the body. There can also be muscle and joint pain. That's actually one of the hallmark symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome. So if you're finding yourself achy all over, this is related to an autoimmune issue at times, and also of course the systemic inflammation throughout your body, which goes hand in hand with chronic fatigue syndrome. And then there's also things like I touched on earlier with your libido. This can be low sex drive, and then also low testosterone levels or unoptimal hormone levels for women. So those are some of the main symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome, and some of the causes of chronic fatigue syndrome, like I touched on earlier, are stress overload. You're constantly stressing yourself. This can be stress through work, family stress, emotional stress. Don't discount emotional stress, because emotions work on the limbic system, and the hypothalamus is part of the limbic system of the brain. This is the part of the brain, the collection that deals with emotions and things of that nature. So don't discount emotional stress. And then there's also hard mental stress. So you can be overworking yourself mentally. Remember, this guy takes 20% of your daily energy, and all these can contribute to chronic fatigue syndrome. Something else that's been linked to chronic fatigue syndrome, kind of a silent background influence that you might not even know of is mold and the mycotoxins that they release. So if you have mold issues in your house, then those mycotoxins can just really suppress your immune system, and that overall drains resources from your body and can cause chronic fatigue syndrome. Then you have other things like chronic diseases that can go hand in hand with chronic fatigue syndrome because the entire body is just dysregulated. You have things like cardiovascular problems, your heart isn't beating efficiently, blood pumping through your body isn't optimal, and therefore you're not getting good oxygen uptake, good nutrient intake, and that's adjusting your body's homeostasis. And then you have things that are really severe like cancer. So there are a lot of things that can contribute to chronic fatigue syndrome. Another one that's kind of in the background would be electromagnetic fields. If you're exposing yourself to a high load of electromagnetic fields, let's say you're in an apartment building and there's like 30 Wi-Fi routers around you, and then when you go to the office, you're right next to the networking cabinet. The power grid, of course, is always pulsing. Your cell phone, laptop emit a lot of electromagnetic radiation. If you're constantly immersed in these artificial electromagnetic fields, then that in and of itself can also wear the body down, cause inflammation, and potentially lead to something like chronic fatigue syndrome. Another thing that can cause chronic fatigue syndrome, it would be space weather. So if there is a lot of space weather and geomagnetic activity that's happening, then this can fatigue your body because it's adjusting your body's bioelectricity away from homeostasis, and that then requires a response from the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland and the adrenal glands. They have to change their hormone secretion, and this uses up resources. So as there's a resource drain, if it happens long enough, then that can cause or contribute to chronic fatigue syndrome, also known as adrenal fatigue. And this also goes hand in hand with thunderstorms and if it's raining a lot. So for example, people in Seattle, the United States, it rains a lot there, and depression is very common there. And thunderstorms and rain also come with these big electromagnetic potentials within them. With rain, they don't build up enough to actually discharge, but with a thunderstorm, these negative and positive electromagnetic potentials within the thunderstorm are absolutely massive in scale, and that's right in your local environment. Whereas a geomagnetic storm is happening out in space, but then that affects you through various feedback mechanisms like the ionosphere, Schumann resonances, and telluric currents. At this point, you may be wondering, how can earthing, that is taking your bare feet, going outside, walking around, laying out at the park, and just nature bathing in general, how can that help with severe dysregulations of the HPA axis, various parts of the brain, the autonomic nervous system, and how that all leads to chronic fatigue syndrome? Well, to understand this, we have to quickly go down to the atomic scale of the body and then work our way up. So fundamentally, we're all made up of atoms. So we have protons and neutrons in a nucleus, and then we have electrons on the outside. And actually, just looking at an atom, this explains free radicals and inflammation, because a free radical is a molecule that has an open electron slot and is looking for an electron to fill its orbital structure so it's stable. So it goes around the body until it can react with something, and then it takes that electron, and therefore it's now stable. But whatever it took that from is now unstable, and then it becomes a free radical in and of itself. This is one aspect of how the atomic scale influences things that you can visibly and noticeably feel, like inflammation, because that can be like your sore joints or muscles, for example. So you have the atomic scale in operation, and then when you go one step up, you have molecules, and you have cells, and you have DNA. And DNA instructs your cells on how to like what proteins to produce and kind of where they go, and the overall machinery of your body. And a lot of those instructions are governed by cellular voltage gradients, these morphogenetic fields. So now you can start to see how electromagnetic forces have a big influence on your overall health and wellness, because if your bioelectric cellular voltage gradients are unoptimal, then you're not going to be in phase how you need to be, and you're not going to be balanced in terms of your autonomic nervous system, in terms of your neurotransmitter production, in terms of your brain waves, your heart rhythms, all these things. So what the hypothalamus seeks to do that part of the HPA axis is it seeks to maintain homeostasis and internal stability, and it'll do what it needs to. So understand that chronic fatigue syndrome is your body's way of forcing you to rest and relax and to train those circuits so you can finally overcome the problems that you're having and to change your lifestyle as needed, because you need to learn to rest and relax. You need to learn to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. You have to create those neural grooves and increase your connection to your body, your somatic senses, your interoceptive system. This all requires training if you're not good at it naturally. So chronic fatigue syndrome is your body's way of saying, hey, I'm going to make you really tired so you can't do anything. So you have to do this. So that's why earthing is such a perfect fit, because earthing and going outside and just walking around the park, or maybe you have a nice backyard area, you can do earthing just laying down on the grass and taking a nap, a little snoozer. You can also do earthing a little bit more actively with exercise and workouts and yoga outdoors. You can also practice earthing inside the house with like an earthing sheet on your bed. I have a do-it-yourself earthing sheet video here you can watch. There's various ways to earth yourself, but the best way is to actually get outside, away from the power grid of your house and all the cellular networks and everything, and to put yourself in conductive contact with the ground. Now your hand and your foot have a bunch of free nerve endings in them, and this makes them more conductive than other parts of your body. Let's say like your elbow, which has that hard, dry skin cap. So when you go to the earth and you connect to it, you bring into your body and you connect with these rhythms that flow through the earth naturally. These are telluric currents, and tellurics are electromagnetic waves that travel through the earth. Basically large scale electric currents, and they have voltages and amperages that range from very small to huge depending on where you are in the Earth's surface. So at the Earth's crust, at the very surface of the Earth's crust, they are pretty minor, but again, your bioelectric systems are also very minor. They're not large, so they are about the same strength, and your body can enter into phase with these telluric currents and optimize your bioelectric system that way. Now, the reason why this optimizes your bioelectric system is we have to again think about the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus again is saying, hey, we want to maintain homeostasis in the body. Well, one of the biggest influences on homeostasis for you is your environment. How is your environment changing? And you could be outside and everything could look normal, but if there's a geomagnetic storm happening and the electromagnetic potentials of the magnetosphere and the ionosphere and the Earth's surface and the tellurics and the Schumann resonances are all changing rapidly, these electromagnetic currents which interact with you bioelectrically, your heart rhythms, your brain waves, your autonomic nervous system rhythms, then that is pushing you away from homeostasis, and your hypothalamus then tells your pituitary gland and your adrenals how to respond. This could also be a deviation from homeostasis that's self-imposed. Let's say you're working yourself up, you're getting stressed for whatever reason, whether it's an external factor or it's kind of an internal factor. So earthing in and of itself puts your bioelectric rhythms in phase with the geophysical telluric rhythms of the earth. These are these natural circadian rhythms that exist. And also by going outside and breathing fresh air and practicing some meditation, is taking time for quiet reflection and actually resting and relaxing, which is what chronic fatigue syndrome is forcing your body to do, forcing you to do. Then you kind of attack that problem from both sides. You attack it from the lifestyle side, and you also attack it from the bioelectric side, which is really like the base of your health and wellness and your physiology. So when you go outside, when you're earthing, that is really, really powerful in improving things like chronic fatigue syndrome, not to be underestimated, but just know that it takes time. If your chronic fatigue syndrome or your chronic disease or whatever took years to develop, then it may take months to years for this to really start to remediate, because you have to do a deep rewiring of your body and your nervous system, your brain. You have to go deep into these rejuvenative processes, autophagy, apoptosis, that you have at your disposal, but it's not going to happen overnight. Now, you will see some pretty quick benefits from going outside. Your body voltage, for example, equalizes almost instantly once you connect with the earth. And then a 30 to 90 minute, let's say, nap at the park is deeply rejuvenating and can really give you a big boost of energy once you come out of it. That's been my personal experience. But if you have chronic fatigue syndrome, it's going to take probably at least a couple months, if not more, to really start to make some serious headway into feeling more like yourself. And if you've had it for a while, you're going to be surprised because your normal self is the one with chronic fatigue syndrome. So going and all of a sudden finding yourself so invigorated and full of these vital life force energies is going to be really, really exciting. I can guarantee you that. So other things that can kind of throw off your homeostasis electromagnetically would be like thunderstorms or rain systems, like rainstorms, because these carry electromagnetic potentials with them. In a thunderstorm, they're very large. They're so large they can create lightning strikes, whether they're cloud to cloud or cloud to ground. Whereas in a rainstorm, they don't build up to that degree and the electromagnetic charge dissipates with the rain. And then of course we have space weather, which we talked about. So if you have like a solar flare off the sun, a coronal mass ejection impacts the Earth, then that causes volatility and warping of Earth's geomagnetic field, and that then changes the electromagnetic potentials of the ionosphere. It changes the electromagnetic potentials of Earth's radiation belts, which sit outside the ionosphere and are coupled to it. It changes the energetics of the plasma in the Earth's magnetotail and how that plasma is moving and shifting and interacting with those radiation belts. And then that then all translates and trickles down to things like the Schumann resonances. These are natural electromagnetic standing waves, which have the same frequencies as your brain waves that you normally have at picotesla strengths, and the dominant frequency of the fundamental Schumann resonance is 7.8 hertz, which is the same wavelength as the circumference of the Earth. So that's why it's a natural resonant standing wave for the Earth. It's just the Earth's natural resonant frequency. And this we evolved in. Our brain connects to the Schumann resonances, our heart connects to the Schumann resonances, our nervous system connects to the Schumann resonances. So when those change, that can also then trigger your hypothalamus to change the output of certain hormones it may have, and also it'll send instructions to the pituitary gland, which is your master endocrine gland. So let's get into the hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal axis. There's many more components to this actually. One visualization that may be very helpful for you in understanding all this is one that I got from Paul Chek, who's really, really great. And you can imagine your body like a web. And you can even zone in and imagine like the endocrine system as a web. All the different hormones that you have. There's like growth hormone, there's insulin, there's testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, thyroid hormones, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin, and you get the point. There's a whole bunch. So you can think of your endocrine system as a web, but you can also think of your entire body as a spider web. And if you pull on any single string for a spider web, what happens? The entire web vibrates. It's incredibly in tune and connected to everything. So you can't pull on one string without pulling on another. So you can't pull on one hormone without all the others changing in response. So that's important to know with chronic fatigue syndrome and the HPA axis, because if you have chronic fatigue syndrome, then you have a hormone dysregulation. There's something out of balance, or there could be multiple hormones that are out of balance. Whether some are too high, others are too low, whatever it is, they're all out of phase and not optimal and coherent with each other. So what you need to do is, rather than like pulling on this web a lot, is you really need to let the web come to a standstill and to finally actually kind of stop moving. And that's why earthing again is so valuable, because you are doing exactly that. You're letting your body enter into that rejuvenative parasympathetic state, which is deeply resting and deeply relaxing and deeply healing. And then when you're in that state, when your autonomic nervous system is actually starting to normalize and become coherent in its activity, then that shows your hypothalamus, hey, everything's looking good right now. We can actually stop having to overproduce that and run out of resources for this, and then things can start to heal, rewire, and regroove. So you have your hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal axis. Your hypothalamus is part of the limbic system. This is part of the emotional regulation in your brain. So this is connected to your emotions. So again, if you have a lot of emotional stress, that will throw you off right away. And The hypothalamus is interesting because it releases oxytocin and also dopamine. So your love hormone is oxytocin, and then dopamine is like your pleasure and motivation and reward hormone and neurotransmitter. So those are both important to know. The hypothalamus seeks homeostasis and internal balance. So if it's finding itself out of balance and there's it's shifted away from homeostasis, and the hypothalamus will take those senses that's telling it that, all this sensory input from the brain, and then it feeds it to the pituitary gland, which is right below. So you have your hypothalamus here, and then your pituitary gland is here. It's right under your brows. It's in the center of your brain, basically like your third eye chakra. And your pituitary gland is your master endocrine gland. And the reason why it's your master gland, because it produces so many of the body's hormones. It produces growth hormone, it produces follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, prolactin, and all these have various effects on the body. So for example, growth hormone is something that governs your growth, your healing, your regeneration. People that are older and they take growth hormone as advised by like a hormone doctor often see themselves with like this anti-aging effect. So it can be really powerful. You want proper growth hormone production. Then you have follicle stimulating hormone. For men, this controls sperm production. For women, this helps regulate the menstrual cycle and the release of eggs. You have luteinizing hormone, which for men instructs the testes to produce testosterone, and in women, along with follicle stimulating hormone, again, regulates that menstrual cycle and the release of eggs. Then you have adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is the hormone that goes to the adrenals, which are located on the kidney, that other part of the HPA axis, and tells it whether to release cortisol or not. So that, of course, it's like a cascade, adrenocorticotropic hormone to cortisol, and cortisol is a big player here. We're going to get into that in depth. And then you have thyroid stimulating hormone. This stimulates the thyroid, the butterfly-shaped gland right here under your chin, your throat chakra area. That releases T3 and T4, and your thyroid is connected to your metabolism, your appetite, your digestion, a whole bunch of very important things. So you don't want your thyroid to be dysregulated. And then you have prolactin, which is produced like sent out by the pituitary gland in women to produce breast milk. Of course, everyone has like a base level of prolactin, but in women that are producing breast milk, it goes way up. It triggers that release. And then in men, that's most well known for the refractory period. So after ejaculation, then your prolactin rises up dramatically in some people and others less so, and that's your refractory period that stops you from being able to reactivate everything that's fun down there. So the interesting thing about prolactin is that it is antagonistic with dopamine. So if your dopamine is high, your reward and pleasure and motivation neurotransmitter, your prolactin is low. And if your prolactin is high, then your dopamine is low. So with chronic fatigue syndrome, there's often a lack of drive. It's like, oh, I just can't do this. I just can't find the energy to do this. Well, your prolactin is probably through the roof. So by optimizing the functioning of your HPA axis, then you can start to work on that prolactin among everything else there. Your testosterone level may be really low in the gutter. If you're a guy, that's actually one of the most common symptoms. And there's a lot more. Now, your adrenals are the kind of the end of this whole cascade. They sit on top of your kidneys, so you have one on each side, and your adrenals produce cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone, and it gives you a lot of energy in the moment. It's released during like a fight or flight response. Something stimulating happens, something kind of stressful happens, your body will send out a surge of cortisol. And cortisol, as I talked about in my gut health and electromagnetic fields video, that can affect your digestion. It'll stop the movement of food through your digestive system, because it's not good to be digesting food while you're like running away from a bear, for example, or you're in the middle of a boxing fight. And while that might not be happening to you that much in life, your sympathetic nervous system, which is what that all is, gets activated in other ways. Maybe your boss is yelling at you. Maybe you're having an argument with someone. You're very emotionally triggered by something. These can all trigger your fight or flight response, your sympathetic nervous system, and cause the release of cortisol. Now, you normally release cortisol in the morning that spike of cortisol is what actually helps you to wake up. And that's why with chronic fatigue syndrome, you can have problems waking up in the morning. You just can't find yourself waking up because you have this blunted cortisol response. And then maybe you're having cortisol rise at points throughout the day that's not optimal. And this is then throwing off your sleep and your wake cycle. So you're finding it hard to fall asleep because your cortisol is too high. There's an antagonistic relationship between cortisol and melatonin. So the adrenals are really important at managing your circadian rhythms. And if your circadian rhythms are off, then you're going to have fatigue because you're just not sleeping at the right time. You're not resting at the right time. You're not active at the right time. Your energy metabolism is off. It's out of phase with your natural environment, which fundamentally is the sun. The sun moves over the surface of the earth, rather the earth rotates, right? And this causes a big telluric wave of activity. And that telluric wave is one of these circadian rhythms that your body latches onto and uses. So if you're disconnected from the earth, you're not getting that normalized circadian rhythm from the sun, from the earth, and that will throw you off and that can cause problems. So that's one reason why earthing is so powerful in remediating and healing chronic fatigue syndrome, is because you're actually doing the thing that your body needs to do to be healthy. The way we evolved to be in nature, barefoot, walking around, running around, in phase with these natural rhythms. We didn't evolve to have thick rubber synthetic soled shoes and to lay in bed all day on the 4th story, completely disconnected from the ground, electromagnetic potential, so on and so forth. So the adrenals and their release of cortisol and also like adrenaline, that also governs your stress response, as we talked about, but also inflammation. Cortisol can raise inflammation. This is also has an effect on your blood pressure. Cortisol release will increase your blood pressure, and then also blood sugar. So cortisol affects your blood sugar, and this connects to your pancreas and insulin secretion. Insulin is like one of the most powerful hormones in the body. So this is all connected to your gut health and your diet as well. We talk about some foods that help here. So we talked about the web and how if you pull on any one of these strands, it affects all the others. And one of the things that's affected greatly by chronic fatigue syndrome, and that can be helped a lot with by earthing, is your sleep rest cycles. So you have a sleep cycle here. This is a 90-minute sleep cycle. Normally you have multiple sleep cycles every single night. And basically what happens is you go from waking consciousness to stage 1 sleep, stage 2 sleep, stage 3 sleep, which is your deepest sleep, and then you go up to REM sleep, rapid eye movement. This is where you dream, and then you go up into waking consciousness again, just for a moment. If it's a nap, you might actually wake up permanently after that. If it's during the night, you'll then go back through this sleep cycle. So you have your 3rd stage of sleep, and that's connected to delta brainwave rhythms. These are very low frequency, 0 to 4 hertz electromagnetic waves that pulse across your brain, and they're connected to deep sleep and rejuvenation. So if you have problems entering into that 3rd stage of sleep, that deep sleep, then you're not going to be experiencing those rejuvenative healing effects that your body needs to recover from the prior day. So that's very important. And then you have your REM sleep here, which is where you have rapid eye movement, you're dreaming, and this is connected to theta rhythms, 4 to 8 hertz brainwave rhythms, and this is associated with creativity and dreaming and all those good things. Now, when you are in waking consciousness, right before you fall asleep, you have dominant alpha brainwave rhythms, and these are 8 to 12 hertz rhythms, and this is what you will have propagating across your brain in a dominant manner when your eyes are closed, you're relaxed, and you're meditating. But you'll also have alpha rhythms right before you go to sleep. So if you have an alpha rhythm dysregulation, then that's going to cause problems falling asleep. Now, one thing that causes a dysregulation in your alpha 8 to 12 hertz rhythms is if you have an irregular heartbeat or a weak heartbeat, because that pulse wave generated from the heart travels up to your brain, and it's the pulse wave hitting your brain every second that provides the timing signal for those alpha rhythms to occur. So you have an 8 to 12 hertz rhythm, and then you can have higher frequency rhythms stacked on top of that, but the base rhythm that is the master timing signal for all of those is that 1 hertz heart rate rhythm, from that pulse wave. So that pulse wave goes up, and then you see alpha rhythms actually start to become coherent and sine wave in their activity afterwards. And then the pulse wave comes again, and then the alpha rhythms again stabilize and become coherent. If you have good alpha brainwave synchronicity, then you can also have higher frequency brainwave states across the entire brain. These are like high frequency beta waves and gamma waves, which are associated with higher levels of consciousness. If you have chronic fatigue syndrome, then one of your problems is that you're chronically fatigued, you're always tired, and you have too many beta brainwaves. Your beta brainwaves are ramped up too high, and they're stopping you from entering into that calmer parasympathetic alpha state. So beta brainwaves are 12 to 30 hertz. Some people classify them as 12 to 35 hertz. But overall, these are like your waking consciousness brainwaves. If you're productive, you're doing something, you have a task in front of you, you're talking to someone, then you have your beta rhythms. And beta rhythms are not bad, but when they are stronger than they should be and they're propagating when they shouldn't be, then that's an issue. You should be engaging in beta and gamma brainwaves when it behooves you, and then also your alpha brainwaves. Those have their place throughout the day. It's good to have like a base alpha rhythm. It keeps you calm, relaxed, and focused and creative. And then those theta rhythms are really good for being creative, entering into those dream states. And then of course, you want delta waves, those deep sleep waves. And one note is that babies actually have really strong delta activity. And that's because they're in such a growth cycle, of course, at the beginning of their life. So you can start to see how all these things connect together. So earthing and grounding and going outside, nature bathing, breathing fresh air, meditating, do body scans and like awareness checks and somatic therapy and yoga. All these things can help with chronic fatigue syndrome quite dramatically if you engage in them and if you do it consistently. That's the thing. You can't expect this to work just once. You can't expect to, do this really hard for like a week and actually engage that sympathetic nervous system like, I'm gonna do it. And then you run out of willpower, and because you didn't see anything happen, you have to trust the process with this. You just have to make it a part of your lifestyle. So if you are at work all day, then try to find a park near you and go outside during your lunch break, or maybe there's a little lick of grass somewhere, put your feet on the ground, and that's a good way to earth yourself during the day. Of course, you can make a earthing sheet. I have this do-it-yourself earthing sheet video here. That's the best way to earth yourself in the home when you're sleeping. That's when your body wants to go into these deep rejuvenative cycles. Is when you're sleeping, that's when that occurs. So if you earth yourself and normalize your bioelectricity during your sleeping moments, those, let's say 5 to 8 hours, then that can be really, really healing and really expedite the healing process. So keep that in mind. Now, other things that help. You can eat certain foods. Now, you have your own dietary preferences. I'm just putting foods that help with this, okay? So you have eggs because they contain a lot of B vitamins and choline. You have salmon, beef liver, citrus, the adrenals. They produce cortisol from vitamin C, so citrus is key. And then you have things like parsley, super rich in a lot of different micronutrients. Dark leafy greens, mushrooms, you can put those outside and they'll actually synthesize vitamin D, so you can eat your vitamin D that way. And then potatoes and onions. Onions are really good for just like vital life force energies. You have nutrients, magnesium. L-threonate is my favorite form of magnesium. It crosses the blood-brain barrier easily and it helps you get that good deep sleep. Magnesium is really good also for just optimizing your bioelectricity. Most people are deficient in magnesium. It's the second most common nutrient deficiency. Then you have vitamin C, like we talked about, because your adrenals need that to make cortisol. Vitamin D is like one of the base hormones needed for all your other hormones. And that's also why eggs are good, because they contain cholesterol, which is needed for hormone production. So going outside and getting some sunlight on your body, a safe, responsible amount of sunlight on your skin, will produce vitamin D endogenously. And that is, of course, the best way to do it, because they've shown differences between endogenous vitamin D production and like a vitamin D D3 5000 IU supplement. So going outside, and guess what? You can do that while you're earthing. You can produce vitamin D for free while you're earthing. Then also you have B vitamins. which are related to energy metabolism. You have choline, which is good for the brain and neurotransmitters. Boron, which is good at optimizing and helping increase uptake of vitamin D. And magnesium is good for your testosterone levels. If you're a guy, just take a little pinch of borax salt. The LD50 is similar to table salt, so it's totally safe. And also zinc, which is good for your immune system, your gut health, and a whole bunch of other good things. So those are some micronutrients. There's some macronutrient recommendations I can give you, and those would be to increase your protein, to increase your fat intake, and to decrease your carbohydrate intake. And the reason why you want to decrease your carbs and to raise your protein and fats is because A, most people are taking in too many carbs to begin with. Even if you're not vegetarian or vegan, most people are eating a lot of unprocessed foods which are carb heavy. So it's good to reduce your carbs to begin with in that context. But also carbohydrates, the more you eat of them, the more you torque on your pancreas and therefore your insulin release. You want to make sure that you're not stressing your pancreas and your insulin too much, because that is like the main hormone of your body. And again, you pull on that web and all the others change. So fundamentally, you want to have healthy blood sugar levels and blood glucose levels and things of that nature. So reducing your carbohydrate intake is good for that. Improve your fat metabolism, and taking in more protein in general is good for being healthy and lean and strong and muscular. Now, you also have some herbs that can help, and I can actually pull them out here. We have our box of goodies. We have ashwagandha. This is a Ayurvedic herb, which is really great at normalizing a lot of different things in the body. It's like one of the master adaptogens, so I recommend ashwagandha. And I don't recommend KSM 66 ashwagandha. It's too potent and causes problems, it seems, rather than helping them. So just whole ashwagandha root, and you can dose this at like 500 milligrams to a couple grams, depending on how you feel. And I have some links in the video description for that and all of these. You can also, again, I talked about magnesium. L-threonate is really good. This is Magmine by Jarrow Formulas. This is what I use. Put a link in the video description. Again, turkey tail is a medicinal mushroom, very healthy, really good at balancing your autonomic nervous system, improving parasympathetic nervous system activity, helping you to rest and relax. It's anti-cancer, and just in general, something that you can easily add to your tea or just to your water or a smoothie, or just take it on its own, which will help a lot. I like the Nootropics Depot brand. This is what I use and recommend, so you'll see that in the video description. You have other medicinal mushrooms like reishi here. This is some old reishi, and this is some new reishi that I just harvested. Of course, they sell powder supplements from like Nootropics Depot. You can check those out. I actually have some turkey tail here that I've harvested. So you can harvest this yourself or buy it whole or get the powdered versions. And then there's herbs like passion flower. Passion flower is really great. It's a nervine. It helps you just overall help you feel good and calm. It's an anti-anxiolytic, so it reduces anxiety, improves your mood, your emotional state, and again, helps you to enter into that calm parasympathetic state. And then you have chamomile, which is one of the best because it does all of that, and it also stabilizes alpha rhythms. So it helps to stabilize your bioelectricity, your heart rate, and therefore also your brain alpha rhythms. So chamomile is really great, and all those are really useful herbs and supplements that you can take while you're practicing earthing and doing all the normal health and wellness things that you should be doing to fix and heal your chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, when you have chronic fatigue syndrome, one of the things that can happen is you're so tired that you don't find the time to exercise or work out. Once you get to the point where you do have a little bit of energy reserve, it's really useful to engage in some exercise however you can, even if that's just a walk or something as simple as yin yoga, because that fundamentally helps to engage your parasympathetic system, nervous system afterwards. So when you, let's say, do a run, you go on a run, your sympathetic nervous system kicks up, but then your body wants to go parasympathetic afterwards because that is the normal rhythm. That's the normal way it does things. You create a positive and then it wants to go negative, the duality of waves. So once you have a little bit of energy at your disposal, if it's really bad, then you can engage in some very simple exercise like a slow walk or yin yoga, which is really fantastic for all this if you haven't done it. And then once you start to accumulate more and more then I recommend more intense exercise, whether this is going to the gym, whether this is something like Pilates or yoga, like a yang type yoga practice. And there's a lot of other ways to engage in exercise. Sports is excellent. Now, three things that you don't want to be doing if you have chronic fatigue syndrome is you don't want to use any cannabis, you don't want to drink any coffee, and you want to fix your mouth breathing if you are a mouth breather. You want to breathe through your nose because this actually it changes and remodels your face. It's really interesting, but breathing through the nose, because it produces nitric oxide in your nasal passages, helps to reduce your blood pressure and improve all these different blood dynamics, and also it activates your parasympathetic nervous system. So breathe through the nose, you can breathe out the mouth, but when you're sleeping especially, learn to breathe through your nose. And if you're having problems with that, just put some tape over your mouth. Honestly, that's what I had to do like 3-4 years ago, is I found myself mouth breathing because my nose would always get stuffy. And the reason why is my body was just pushing inflammation to my nasal passages. So one night I just taped my mouth shut and I just forced myself to breathe through my nose, and it took like 10 minutes. And I felt like I was going to pass out because I couldn't get the oxygen, but then like literally within a split second, all that inflammation went away. I was able to fall asleep, and then from that moment on, I'm a nose breather, both when I sleep and also throughout the day. Now, cannabis is not an herb that you want to take if you have chronic fatigue syndrome because it increases your heart rate. So your heart is always beating. It's something that you definitely don't want to stress. And if you are already fatigued, causing your heart to beat faster is one of the worst things you can do. Now, cannabis will lower your prolactin slightly, but it does it at the expense of raising your dopamine levels. And if you're using cannabis all the time, then that's going to chronically reduce your dopamine levels, which isn't a good thing. So I would avoid cannabis. Again, it touches a lot of different hormones. It lowers your testosterone. So when you pull on that web, of course, everything vibrates. So cannabis is not a good one. And then you should also avoid coffee if you have chronic fatigue syndrome, because coffee is something that stimulates the release and production of cortisol. So that's a pretty simple one to understand. We all love coffee, or most of us do. It's really great when you can have it, but if you are chronically fatigued, always tired, stay away from the coffee because that's only going to make it worse. Stick to a tea that's made out of something like passion flower, chamomile, and dandelion root. That'd be really excellent. You can use, again, those other herbs like turkey tail and reishi and ashwagandha. So those are my recommendations outside of earthing for how you can help heal and fix and remediate chronic fatigue syndrome, and therefore, you know, by improving your HPA axis and all these other bioelectric components for your body. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please click that like button and subscribe for more content like this. I have all these links that are helpful for you in the video description, including more information on chronic fatigue syndrome, some articles that I wrote. I have my holistic gut health guide that you can buy and read. It's 88 pages, condensed, full of really good information on how you can heal your gut holistically. And that's really important because if you have chronic fatigue syndrome, you may also have gut health problems. The two are connected together intimately. So I recommend you look into that. And in general, I have some other videos that you may find of use. You can watch my other videos on earthing, and then you can also watch a video on gut health and EMFs. I also have this video on energy rhythms and holistic healing. So with that, thanks so much for watching and have a great day. Ciao.